Movie Boss Specialist Phil and John are back with episode number 97 as we continue counting down our favorite 100 movies of all time. We're at number 4. And tonight we're talking about Amelie and The Thing. And yes, it is the Amelie from 2001 and The Thing from 2011, right, John? That's the one you want to talk about. Don't lie.
This is specifically why I put my name as John Carpenter's The Thing, so that we couldn't make that joke.
It was also very crazy to me that because it's John Carpenter's The Thing, in 2011, they could just get away with calling it The Thing. Yeah. And didn't even really have to call it a remake or anything like that. I mean, obviously they wanted to, but if you type in The Thing, it's a 50-50 shot at which one you're going to get first, which is not how it should be.
I actually have a really funny story about that where I rave about The Thing all the time, obviously, and my mom had never seen it. And I was on the phone with her once and she was like, "Oh yeah, I watched The Thing. I kind of enjoyed it, but I thought Kurt Russell was in this movie." And I'm like, yeah, he is. I'm like, "Wait, did you watch the 2011 version of The Thing?" She's like, "With the guy from NCIS?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's the wrong version of the movie, Mom."
Oh my God, that's so funny.
Well, she just watched it. It was on TV. So she just decided to watch it because I talk about it all the time.
Well, and that's a lot easier of one to get the rights for. Like John Carpenter's thing, I had to rent on Amazon. But like The Thing, nobody's clamoring to have that one on their docket. So you can really find that one anywhere, which makes it a little bit easier. But I digress. So we're going to be talking about two movies that are pretty much as opposite as they can be. And this is, I believe, let me make sure here. I believe this is pretty much the last time that we have such opposite movies, because Vertigo isn't that dark and Eternal Sunshine's a little dark. There Will Be Blood and American Beauty are both like really negative takes on American life. And then Stalker, I don't know what that is. And The Deer Hunter is very negative. But I think this is the last time in this podcast that we're going to have such opposite films. Because Amelie, I think the second highest review on Letterboxd is the movie equivalent of being hugged. And John Carpenter's The Thing is certainly not that. So, John, I guess we're starting with Amelie, right? I mean, they're both pretty popular, but I guess Amelie, huh?
I believe John Carpenter's The Thing might just be a little more popular.
It has more of the cult following, whereas Amelie, if you did this like 10 years ago, it might actually be the bigger one. But right now, it's The Thing. So we'll talk about Amelie first. So, okay. Yeah. So Amelie from 2001, the Jean-Pierre Jeunet movie, which is this the third Jeunet? Yeah, it is the third because I threw in Delicatessen, which will 100% be in my top 100 the next time. I had just never seen it before. And then obviously I'm a very big fan of A Very Long Engagement, which was in my top 100. So we're finally to Amelie, the movie that got me into Jeunet, even though I will admit that Alien 4 was the first Jeunet movie I saw, the steaming pile of mess that is. But this movie, I remember, so in my public school somehow, one of our teachers had convinced the school board to allow him to do a film class. That film class lasted a total of 2 years, but he still convinced them to do a film class. And because I was going to school, my senior year was 2009 into 2010. So we did a favorite movies of the decade. And I remember his personal list had this at, I think, number 2 or something along those lines. But I hadn't seen it. And IMDb's top 250 had this in there and all that and whatever. So I was like, okay, let me sit down. Let me watch this movie. Let me see what it's about. I mean, if you read what it's about, if you read the synopsis, it's like, okay, yeah, it's a Parisian waitress who wants to be a do-gooder. That sounds like hell on earth. Like, what are you talking about? But what I fell in love with from the first time I watched this movie is the style. The style. There's a lot of great romantic comedies out there. I could argue I have one next week, even though I don't know how much of a comedy Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is. No matter how many times you laugh, it is certainly a downer ending, unlike Amelie, which is a very positive ending. They ride away on a motorcycle and they're laughing, or a moped, whatever. Sorry, I'm not European. They ride around on something with 2 wheels and it confuses me. But it's the style. But then on top of that, it is how Jeunet is able to squeeze every last drop of real emotion from a movie that is very light at times. It is laughing at you when you're going through the opening of this. This person likes this. This person likes this. This person likes this. And he knows it's redundant. So he finally says, the cat likes this. And you're like, oh my God, he has gotten to the point now where he's telling you what the cat likes. He's telling you the millibars and the air pressure and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. And he goes so hard at that. But then the part where they dump the fish into the river or the stream, whatever it is, and the rain starts coming down and it just kind of disappears, and Jan Tiersen's beautiful score starts playing, you realize those moments of like childlike friendship and like what you're clinging to, and just like those first feelings of loss and all of that. It's those things that just elevate this for me. And what I love the most though about this movie, aside from the style and aside from that, is the plot to this movie is so ridiculous. It is so nonsensical. And yet it works so perfectly. This movie has a photo booth repairman, a guy who collects photos and pieces them together of people he doesn't know, a little girl whose father touched her so little that he thought she had a heart problem. Like, it's that. And she works at this cafe and she's trying to find love, and she drops her thing the day Lady Diana dies, and it rolls over and it unlocks this treasure trove. It's a fantasy, but it's such a fun adventure to go on. And it leaves me feeling good. And it's the only movie in my top 10 where you actually walk out of the movie feeling good. And that's awesome. Like this is the one movie that gets me. Make another Amelie and I'll have happier movies in my top 100.
Yeah, I mean, that's reasonable. I think it's a really cute movie. It didn't quite hit home for me. I like, it's a good movie. Like, don't get me wrong. I enjoyed it. It was a good watch. I'm really glad I watched it. I don't know how much I'm going to go back to it. There's a lot of it I do appreciate. I do really appreciate Janae's style in the film and like all of that. The morbid humor Janae puts into this, very good, because it comes out of left field. It hits you. It's just like, why am I laughing at this? This is not a funny situation. A woman throws herself off Notre Dame onto Amelie's mother, and it's one of the funniest moments in the entire film.
Yep.
Like, that shouldn't be funny, but it is. And like, the way Janae presents it is so good. I think this might be one of those movies where I just had higher expectations for it going in. And to be fair, like, I didn't know a lot about this movie before watching it, but I think there's a setup at the very beginning of this movie where it's talking kind of about how, how hard Amelie's relationships are with her parents, with her dad never touching her, never hugging her and everything like that. And her mom just like, treating her like a student rather than a child, or than her own child, sorry. Like, and then it sets up this idea of like this imagination. And I feel like we do get bits and pieces of that imagination throughout the film, but it never goes to the extent that it sets up for it.
See, but so I agree in some aspects, right? Because when she's a child, we see her with the little green monster thing. And like, that's the type of imagination we're thinking, right? But I also feel that what Janae does a great job of is he keeps you in the head of Amelie the entire movie.
Yeah.
I honestly believe that all of this is her imagination. Like, it's happening in real life, but the way that it's happening, it almost needs to be a part of her imagination for her to feel that it can be real. Think about like the premise, right? She drops the thing, it hits the part of the wall where that pops out. It's imaginative. She pulls out this box and it brings this guy's life back, like to clarity for him. She's walking the blind man, and the way she's talking about things, the fact that the guy she's falling for just happens to be like doing what he's doing, like, it is very imaginative. I understand it's not necessarily what she's seeing that's making it imaginative, but even like the idea she's coming up with to torture Collignon, like, those things are very imaginative, just not in the way that they're necessarily set up right at the beginning. So I do hear where you're coming from with that, But I do think that the movie sticks to its guns from start to finish with that.
Yeah, I can agree with that for sure. Like it does come up, right? Like there are those moments where she's standing in the crowd at the fruit stand, and like she imagines the person in the window of the basement like yelling at her and telling her what to say and stuff. Like there is that form of imagination there. We see it, and we see the way she thinks about things. It's just, I don't know. I just thought it set up for this one thing, and it kind of like veered. It almost wasn't. It's like it wasn't enough of a left turn or staying on straight. It was just like this slight deviation that kind of threw me off.
Yeah, it's a weird movie to try to explain to people, right? Because I mean, you know my taste in movies as well as anybody now, because you've just done a top 100 with me, and we're on episode number 97. We've talked about Oscars for the last 3 years. Every week we say, what's the best movie you watched this week? We talked about movies that are going to go into our top 100. And my family knows my taste very well too. And I remember watching this my senior year of high school, and I loved it immediately. Like I just bought in because it was so different, right? Like I think around this time, and I could be mistaken by a year or two, but I think around this time was when Shane Carruth was making the garbage that he makes. And that's like Primer and Upstream Color, which I call them garbage. I think they're pretentious nonsense, but I know a lot of people like them. So sorry, Shane, you're not listening anyway. But I can't stand Shane Carruth movies. I really can't. I hate them. But they're weird and they're different, and people were attaching to that because they wanted weird and different, but they didn't necessarily want Nolan weird and different or Aronofsky weird and different. Like they wanted something. And so Amelie for me was kind of that weird and different that I wasn't seeing in other movies, because especially at that age, right? 18, 19-year-old guys. What are we watching? We're watching the Coen brothers. We're watching Tarantino. We're watching Aronofsky. We're watching Scorsese. Like that's what we're being trained to watch. And then all of a sudden it was, no, this movie by Genet. It's in like at the time it was in like IMDb's top like 50. It was way up there. It's this little French movie, whatever. And I sat down and I watched it. I was like, that was so different in what I wanted. And I think it's just a hard one because I remember watching it with my parents, and my parents both really liked it, but they were like, why do you love this movie so much? Because how do I explain what the plot or like, I always think you watch The Leftovers, right?
Yeah, of course.
How do you explain The Leftovers to somebody? What's that about? It's about a bunch of people who are depressed, because it's not really about 2% of the population going away. It's about a bunch of people who are depressed.
Yeah.
This movie's about a girl who just does good things for people. So how do you explain that? And I think Genet does it in such like a non-corny way. Like I know Kevin Spacey and I think it was Helen Hunt and Haley Joel Osment had that movie Pay It Forward, and it's like, oh my God, I want to yuck my freaking guts up. But this does it in a way where it's keeping, while it's imaginative and it's unique and it's doing it in such a crazy style, it's keeping it a little grounded too. There's a lot of negativity to it. Like all the people she's helping are going through something really, really bad.
Yeah.
And Genet keeps kind of a light touch on all of it, but everybody's going through really serious problems that everybody goes through in their regular lives. We're just seeing it through this lens of like childlike wonder.
Yes. Yeah.
Because if you think, and we'll talk about all the characters, but if you think about all the characters, every one of them is going through something very, very real.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think part of the appeal of this movie is the innocence of Amelie, right? And just like the way she views the world, it makes, I don't want to say it makes light of situations, but it makes it easier to digest situations, which is the big thing. And the genuine tenderness and goodness of the character leaves you feeling good, which is something that a lot of movies just don't do. And I get like why this one would stick out for it, because it is like a massive juxtaposition to the rest of your top 10, where, you know, those are all heavy. And this is just such a light fare. And maybe that's why, like, I acknowledge it's good, but I'm not like over the moon about it, is I think because it's like, it's a light fare. And it's just like, I get my light fares from other movies rather than this.
Yeah. And what I always found very interesting about this movie is, with all the childlike wonder in it, one of the main characters works at a porn shop.
Mm-hmm.
There's a joke very early on about how many orgasms are being had in Paris. We have literally see a baby born at one
Mm-hmm.
point. That's a pretty graphic shot. And it's like, Amelie is born. It's like, sure, she is. It's very adult, but it's how Janae balances to keep that childlike. And we talked about this with Delicatessen, the part where they're bouncing on the bed in rhythm, right? They're in this post-apocalyptic world, but Janae's style allows for it to be lighter. And I think that's why this movie is in my top 4. Used to be my number 3, and then eventually I just had to admit Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind needed to go there because I rewatch that movie almost every single year. But it's like, so talking about these other characters, like I was getting at. First of all, the premise for this movie is that she's about to turn 24 years old, and she watches Lady Diana die at a very young age. Now, it wasn't 24, but Lady D, as they call her in this movie, was very young. And on that night, she's so shocked that that sets in motion like this, I'm going to do good for people. The characters, the guy who hasn't talked to his daughter or son or whatever in years, and they have a kid and he's been brought back. The blind man, the blind beggar who just sits there and can't do anything. We have the glass man who doesn't leave his house because he can't. We have Lucien, who is like slow. However you want to put it. In 2001, they were calling him dim-witted. So like however you want to put it now, Collignon was calling him much worse than that, right? And then we have the father who is suffering so much from the mother dying and the breakup for Dominic Pignon, who is the greatest actor of all time, and the Georgette who sits behind and does this, and Hippolito who's a failed writer. When you start to break them all down, this movie could have easily lost its magic and its tone like that, because it could have gotten really heavy. And down to the screenplay, Dominic Pignon is such a creep in this movie, but he's playing the tape recorder and he barely talks. And when she laughs and he hits it and it goes, ha, 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 and he says, orgasmic laugh at 402, it is so ridiculous. How does she find out that this Nino Quincampoix is a good guy? Because he knows whatever they are, the adages, whatever they're called, proverbs. He knows those. It's the dialogue, the way they talk, it keeps it light, and it has to, because otherwise this movie starts to become something it shouldn't. And I always say this with real comedies, like I talk like American Pie and stuff like that. They always have their moment that nobody going to watch the movie wants, which is we're all sad and angry at each other. Step Brothers doesn't have that moment. Step Brothers has Will Ferrell has to wipe his butt with the bath mat because he doesn't have toilet paper. Like that's their serious moment. But then you get like, oh, we're not friends anymore. We're not together anymore, blah, blah, blah. Amelie doesn't have that. And it's so good that it does, because if it takes these things as seriously and as heavy as reality should, it loses what makes this movie magical.
I agree. I think like it really benefits from being a French movie too, right? Because it has that European and that French like post new wave style to it, which allows for that lightness in it.
Yeah, it does a lot of meandering, right? It takes its time. It knows it's French. Like out of all Genet's movies, I feel like this is his most French, and not just because it's set in like present day for Paris, but it just feels the most French. It feels like and it's funny because it's his most successful in America by far, like hands down. It was nominated for 5 Oscars. It had all this stuff around it, a lot of hype at the time. I mean, it was a huge, huge movie, and it's just very French. And maybe that's why why it appeals to me so much too, because these American versions of Amelie always go for the Hollywood BS that Genet didn't have to worry about.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like, I think this is a really good example of why it's so important not to just watch American cinema.
Yeah.
Because it does give you that different perspective to it, because it does give you that different look, because like you said, this movie gets made in the States, it doesn't get away with all of this.
Yeah. And I think like, so I'm going to type it in right now because I don't even know. What's another European romantic comedy that I have seen?
I don't know. I have this Russian one that I watch every once in a while for New Year's. That's like a Russian staple for New Year's, but it's fine.
Well, if you look though, right, you type in European romance movies. First one that comes up is Amelie. Then it's Midnight in Paris, Roman Holiday, Notting Hill, Letters to Juliet, Bridget Jones. They're all movies that take place in Europe from the American perspective. I truly have never seen another movie like Amelie. I can confidently say that on this podcast. I have never seen another movie like this. And I like the real elements that are brought in. I like the history that is brought in. People nowadays might not understand necessarily the gravity that Lady Diana's death had. Princess Diana's death was huge when that happened. I mean, go away from the conspiracy theories and everything. Just go to the heart of the matter was this young princess who was very much in the public eye died at a very young age under very weird circumstances. That was huge. And to link that in and have Amelie like seeing herself as Mother Teresa, and who says it in the movie? Like, what? So if they're old and ugly, it doesn't matter. And the person's like, yeah, look at Mother Teresa. Like they literally don't care but that's how people are, right? It's like, oh, well, she did her time. She did her thing. To add those real elements in but then keep it in the fantasy world, that's what does it for me. Also, this launched probably one of the most popular advertisement campaigns of all time. And this movie does not get enough credit for that. And I need to talk about this because, John, I don't know if you have this.
The Travelocity gnome?
Yeah, the roaming gnome.
Yeah. When I saw this, I was like, wait, this is where it came from, isn't it?
This is where it came from. Amelie produced the roaming gnome. And I mean, how long was the Travelocity gnome the face of Travelocity? I mean,
it still is. They still use it in The Amazing Race every year.
Do they? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And that's
still
that's all because of Amelie. So that just needs to be said. But the parts that really get me in this movie, I love the home videos that she makes for The Glass Man.
Yeah.
Jan Tiersen's score is one of my favorites of all time. I can't speak French, so I'm not even going to pretend, but it's called like something like Comptine du Amelie or whatever. It's got the word Comptine in it. I don't even know what the hell it means. That song kills me every single time. It's the one that plays when the fish disappears. It's the one that plays when she's in the kitchen and she's imagining Nino coming up and his hand touching the beads, and then the cat comes in. Jan Tiersen's score is incredible. The home footage type stuff, Amelie imagining herself doing all of those things is great. Like there's so many different things that are being thrown at the wall in this movie. And for me, they stick 100% of the time, which a lot of times in a movie like this, it's too much and it starts to become tiresome. And I never get tired of it in this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you were speaking of like that scene in the kitchen. That might be the best scene in the movie. In all honesty, like, because the performance that Audrey Tautou was giving in that moment is just so good. Like that look of anticipation on her face as those beads move. And she's like, wait, how is this happening? Because I was imagining this. And then you see it's just the cat. And it's like actually a moment of disappointment, which the film doesn't have a lot of. And it elevates that moment when Nino knocks on her door.
Yeah. And then the second time when she goes and looks out the window and it's, you know, because she watches the tape and it's this, that, and whatever, and she run out and you're like, okay, here's gonna be the big, and he's just standing there because he saw her at the window. Like, I totally agree. It elevates those moments because the whole time, what it is too is like you never lose who Amelie is as a character, which lesser director, lesser actors, they would have done that. Lesser writers, they would have lost who Amelie was as a character. Amelie's starts to feel good about herself because she is doing good for others, because she didn't have that like family relationship or any of that. And she's just going through her life. She doesn't know how to really feel like great about herself. And by helping others, she starts to feel like her life is having purpose. And I think it's so fascinating to have a movie like that, where it's not some grandiose, like I'm going to save the world or I'm going to do this. It's just saving the everyday people of Paris.
Mhm.
and then eventually growing the courage to help herself. I love the convoluted, like, I'm gonna make you run up the steps and look down, and the guy points and all that, and then she's calling him on the phone and the whispering woo in people's ears. Like, it's so convoluted, but it also 100% makes sense for this character,
Mhm.
because of who she is. And like, one, still to this day, one of the most creative things I've ever seen in movies that I love is the idea that Nino King-Kampa keeps picking up the ripped up pictures and collects them.
Mhm.
I still find that to be so fascinating. And I love that idea of like people who don't like their pictures, but this other person's going to like collect a photo album, a family album of ghosts,
Yeah.
essentially. I love that.
Yeah, it's a really neat concept, and it makes you like just kind of think about the people in the world around you and how, and I think it actually really helps to elevate the theme of this movie and the idea that like just because you are kind of viewing yourself in one way doesn't mean that everyone else can't appreciate you. Because I think that's really what this movie is about.
Yeah.
And like we see that in just Amelie being so shy and so nervous to talk to Nino throughout it, but she sees the good in everyone and she pushes that out of them, right? Even when it like fails with like Georgette and what's
Yeah,
his
because they
face?
become who they are, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly, right. But like she sees the good in it, she wants to push them towards it because there is good in each of them, and they need to, and everyone kind of just needs to realize it. And like that's what we're seeing Amelie seeing. Amelie's seeing the good in all of these people. And she's just like that catalyst to get it rolling so that they can see it in themselves.
yeah. Yeah, and I really love the what was I gonna say? The scene, like the stuff with Georgette and Dominic Pignon. I mean, obviously, I love just because it's Dominic Pignon, and
I mean, Dominic Pignon has the best line in the entire movie of 408 docking schedule.
yeah. Oh my god, dude, that part kills me every single time. Oh my god, but it's like what she does with the writer, where it's
Mhm.
so small, but he says
Yeah.
that one line and it resonates with her. And so she goes and she writes it on the wall, and he sees that, and you see him literally have a skip in his step. And he
Mhm.
turns around and he stares at the girl's ass as she walks by, and then he jumps over the little chain, and like it makes his day. It makes it feel, because for him it's like he's a failed writer, failed life, whatever, and he's like, who'd you steal that from? Sometimes I do have my own brilliance or whatever. But to have his writing out there for people to see
Mhm.
matters to him. And I think that that's really what this ultimately at the core of this movie, it's about finding happiness with what you have.
Yeah.
Like finding I can't think of the word. It's not happiness, but like being okay with your circumstance.
Yeah.
Being
Like
okay,
accepting it, right?
accepting, yeah, accepting who you are and where you fit into the world. Not everybody's going to be Mother Teresa, not everybody's going to be Princess Diana. But how can you live your life the best way you can? And how can other people live their lives the best way they can? That's what this movie really does. And that's what this movie's about. And that's the deeper theme that I think really hits home in not an overly heavy-handed way, because it's so stylized in other ways that it almost makes you forget that that's the type of movie you're watching.
Yeah. 100% agree.
And the last thing I'll say, I love the Bretto dough part. Is phenomenal.
Mhm.
And like that type of like slip up and why she can't find the right guy, and then when she is sitting there and the guy's like, whatever I say, it won't matter because I'm senile, and we see that, like, that type of relationship stuff, and we see it in A Very
Mhm.
Long Engagement, we see it in Delicatessen, but Janae just really grasped those little things so well.
Yeah.
And the Bretto thing, another thing, you just never see that in American stuff because it's like, oh, that's
Well,
dumb.
you
Like,
almost
why would
can't see it because it's kind of like this
it's the
nuance
pronunciation?
of the French language, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it doesn't translate as well to English. And the fact that like they can present it in this film in a way where it still is understandable why it's such a funny moment, it's impressive.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'll let you go, John, because I know you want to talk about the thing and scary things and unhappiness and not nice. But I love this movie. The part where she's sitting in the bed and she's reading the book, and they got the two pictures above her with the red and the white, and like right before they move, I had that poster hanging on the wall of my dorm room my freshman year of college. Like, it's one of the most beautiful to look at movies. The coloring, the style, and just the way it's presented. It's handling very serious subject matters without handling them in an overly serious way. Keeps that childlike wonder. It has that fantasy element. Honestly, to me, it's the best Guillermo del Toro movie made. Like, it's the best, because it is a lot of what Guillermo del Toro would do, but Guillermo del Toro always goes the way of John Carpenter rather than going the way of like happy, up, whatever. He likes to get more into his science fiction type stuff, but a lot of the elements are the same. Her melting into the puddle, the key in the pocket, the heart beating, after the blind guy crosses the street and he like goes gold, those types of moments. I love Amelie. And when I need a feel good movie, this is the only one. It's literally the only answer to what feel good movie do you watch?
Yeah, totally fair. I get it.
All right, John, but what was your favorite movie you watched this week?
I didn't watch anything like spectacular this week. I didn't watch anything that really stood out. I think the highest rating I gave anything was a 3, which was to The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. I went back to my Jimmy Stewart. I went to John Ford, John Wayne. It's pretty good. Wasn't great. Every scene with John Wayne was incredibly good. Every scene without John Wayne was just like, why is John Wayne not in this movie right now?
I haven't seen that in a really long time. Like, really long. To the point where I almost feel like I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's good. I enjoy it. Not my favorite Western, but it was enjoyable. Everything else I watched a couple of like newer releases this week. I watched Renfield, which didn't go camp enough. It was like almost there. It was almost there. It just didn't quite get there. I watched the Dungeons and Dragons movie, which really did feel like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Unfortunately, that also involved like the meandering you do in between things at times. But like it captured the essence of Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, that was about it.
Yeah, I rewatched the John Wicks and then finally went and saw the fourth one. The third one's the best one. My mind will not change on that anytime soon. I really enjoyed the fourth one. It's just so damn long, and it didn't need to be that long. And after watching the third one, what I realized I love about the third one is you completely understand the story, and they don't take any breaks from the action. And to me, that's like what action is supposed to be. Like, that is a seminal action movie. It'll never be as good as Armageddon, because Armageddon is the creme de la creme of action movies.
Of course.
But John Wick 3, out of the 4, that's the one. That's my go-to. But that being said, the best movie I watched this week was City Lights. Finally rewatched City Lights. It's been years. That'll be in my top 100 next time. It was stupid of me to take that out. You just sit there and you're like, is it just because of the ending? Like, okay. Man, what Charlie Chaplin did in that movie is just out of control. Absolutely out of control. So well done. So adorable. The ending, maybe that's the go-to happy movie, but Amelie will always like have that special place in my heart. Plus they speak. But City Lights is just breathtaking, man. Like, when was the last time you watched City Lights? Ever?
I haven't.
Yeah.
I haven't. It's one of those, I think it's the only one. No, that's not true. It's one of like 3 movies in AFI's top 20 that I haven't watched.
I will say, like, and I'm going to overhype it for you so that you don't like it now. The ending to that movie, it is incredible that a man who at the beginning of the movie makes fun of the fact that talking pictures are a thing, which you'll see how he does it. I won't give it away because it's hilarious. But the way he gives it away, there's no talking the whole movie. It's a romantic comedy and pantomime, as he says. The fact that he nails the ending the way he did is just out of control. And the boxing scene is one of the greatest scenes of all time. But the ending is ridiculous. And actually, on the Criterion that I have, it's really cool. They have behind-the-scenes footage of that, like of them filming the movie, which is weird as hell to see Charlie Chaplin walking around, directing, and it's awesome. It's really awesome. So definitely worth it.
Yeah, I have to get around to it. I've been meaning to for a while. It's just like, it's finding the time to sit down and watch a silent movie. Like, you have to be very intent when you're watching a silent movie, right? You have to have like no distractions going on. I just haven't had an opportunity to do that.
Yeah. My Rachel was like, she wanted to watch it. It was like 10 o'clock at night. She's like, it's only an hour and 25 minutes. I'm like, yeah, but it's silent. She was wide-eyed the whole time. It's one
Yeah.
of those, man. It's really well done. But I think her favorite movie we watched this week is actually what we're about to talk about, which blows my mind because she hates horror movies. But she was yelling at me after why is that not on your top 100? So, John, take over and let's talk about miserable shit. Stop talking about this happy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about someone who makes you realize the goodness in everyone and how happy everything is. We're going to talk about the exact opposite because we're going to talk about a movie that makes you absolutely paranoid and makes it so you can't trust anyone in your entire life. Because that is what John Carpenter accomplishes in his 1982 remake of The Thing. And I think it's really important to mention that this is a remake because not many people realize that. Mm-hmm. Funnily enough, the original movie was the movie that they watch in Halloween in this when they're on the TV. It's one of those weird coincidences that happens, but John Carpenter makes an absolutely perfect horror movie here. And there are a few reasons for that. I love isolation horror, so obviously my favorite horror movie is an isolation horror. Wow, big shocker. But what this movie does, I have never distrusted people as much as I did the first time I watched this movie. And like even subsequent viewings, you still like double check over your shoulder and you just question things after you watch The Thing because the atmosphere that John Carpenter creates in this film is so haunting. It is so terrifying. There are so many things that can be scary, but this just makes you think, who can I trust? Who is actually who they are saying they are? It's a long stretching theme in supernatural horror movies, right? Or in extraterrestrial horror movies, right? The invasion horror. I think like your invasion of the body snatchers, things like that. It's a similar thing, but the way that this is so intimate, it's such a small group of people. Not to mention, it's a cast of like 12 people, and you know every single character so distinctly that you don't know who you can trust at all. He sets it up so well. It has an immaculate score by Morricone. Like, it's as soon as it starts, as soon as you get that Norwegian helicopter and the bum bum, and just that throbbing score kicks in, like you're in for it. You're in for it. You don't know what's going on. You're intrigued. And it's your curiosity as to what's going on, which drives the horror. Because then once you figure it out, it's too late. And that's what The Thing is.
So one of the best things about old school science fiction, now I'm going back to The Thing from Another World, which is the OG. 1950s B-movie science fiction is 10 out of 10. It's so damn good. Whether it be Invasions of the Body Snatchers or this, or even if you go into The Blob, which is, you know, a little bit more ridiculous. But those types of movies were good. They just don't get the credit they deserve for what they're actually saying to society. 1950s America was terrified of Russians. Terrified of Russians. Terrified of communism. Terrified of all of it. And the Red Scare and the Cold War was all about, is your neighbor a communist? You know, it was what's going on here. I mean, it's funny because like you think nowadays, like, is it bad to sit here living in the United States and be like, you say to yourself, is your neighbor a Trump supporter? Is your neighbor a Biden supporter? What's going, like you wonder these things, but you're not as fearful. You might think you are, but in the 50s, in the 50s, you were, as we saw in Dr. Strangelove, you were worried they were going to steal your precious bodily fluids. I mean, it was the end of the world. And I keep calling invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's not invasions. There's one invasion. Is one of the greatest anti-communist movies ever made. I really believe that. The original. I haven't seen actually the Donald Sutherland one, which I need to, but the original is amazing. And The Thing from Another World is about that kind of thing of, we don't know if we can trust you. And now the other thing to understand, though, is by 1982, there was still obviously the fear of communism. And now we're in the Reagan era where things start to kind of take a new shape, right? It's like capitalism's about to win. Reagan takes down the wall at some point. I don't know my years well, but that happens, right? So while there was still the fear, it was a different kind of fear than what it was in the 50s, but it was still a fear of the same type of thing. And Carpenter is able to capture that with this, I don't know if it's you. I don't know if it's you. I don't know if it's you. Can I trust what you're saying to me? What's going to happen? I mean, people were losing jobs. People were losing everything. Like, it was crazy. He captures that without giving up the enjoyment and the fun of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so hard to do. Because if you're watching this movie for the first time in 2023, you might not even realize that this is like, that's like the undertones of this movie are communism, right? Like that's why these movies were made in the first place. And 30 years later, it was still something that was fresh on people's minds. 40 years later, it's really not. But that's what the concern was. And he captures that. But he does it while also making one of the greatest horror movies ever made and not taking away from the fact that this is an alien. And this is destroying them, and it's killing dogs, and it's a shapeshifter. Like, it's so freaking awesome. And it is the ultimate example of why CGI will never stand the test of time, but practical effects always will. Because a lot of times people will sit there and laugh at like really old practical effects, but in this one, you're not laughing at it. It's creepy. It's disgusting. Like, it's flat out disgusting. And yeah, there's like the moments where you can see like, it's like the stop motion kind of thing, but it's freaking disgusting. And somebody made that. CGI is not going to make that. And how many times do I need to see somebody's jaw like fall down really long and then make a loud noise with their open mouth? Like, I've seen that in The Mummy and this and this and this and this and every Exorcist movie. Like, come on. The practical effects, second to none in this movie. They're just incredible. From the dog to the guy's head popping off his body and the little alien running around. I mean, they're second to none from start to finish. Go ahead. You were going to
absolutely. I mean, that's one of the biggest things with this movie is that this is the epitome of practical effects. I think this is when people talk about the effectiveness of practical effects versus computer generated animation. This is what they talk about. Like, this is it, because what this art department was able to do is spectacular. When I watched this movie back in October when it was in theaters for the 40th anniversary, like, there was a bit of a documentary before, and it was just talking about like the effects and like what they do and like the puppetry they use and the way that they like roped the dogs up and then pulled things and then shot it in reverse in order for it to give the effect of it wrapping up them and stuff like that. It's these little techniques that you just grow to appreciate. It's the fact that you get to the end of this movie and they actually blow up the set of the movie. Like, it's just something that it's missing. Like, there's no heart and soul in it anymore. When we see all these CGI effects now, it just doesn't feel like it has the same dedication that a movie like The Thing has. And the fact that it's art design, right? It's the art design that makes these terrifying creatures that are recognizable but not recognizable at the same time. Like, that's what captures the essence of The Thing. That The Thing can make a perfect duplication, but when it's not, it is absolutely horrifying what it actually is.
When it only gets partway there. And I think the fact that this movie is just called The Thing, we don't know what it's supposed to look like and what it's doing. And like, like, that makes it a little bit creepier too. But I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we've talked about this a lot throughout our podcast, and this is probably the last chance we get to talk about it because we don't have any like creature features or anything like that moving forward. But we talked about it with The Exorcist. We talked about it with Planet of the Apes. What did we talk about it on your side? I'm trying to think if there was anything that really, like, Evil Dead 2. I mean, that's a great example. These things, there's campiness to, especially in the Evil Dead 2 sense, there's campiness to it and all that. But they set the tone for there was such an effort put in. And even with the Lord of the Rings, right? When they made the Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of CGI in that movie. But there's also a lot of characters that are done makeup. Where they are loaded with the Urukai and the goblins and whatever. There is a lot of makeup being done in those movies. And so it's not just CGI. There's some CGI, but it's not just that. And there are a lot of movies nowadays where there's like none of that, right? Like you put somebody in a mask, like we see a lot with Marvel and stuff like that. You put somebody in a mask, and then everything else behind them is CGI. It's already not holding up in a lot of instances, but it's really not going to hold up further down the line. You can look at the thing and say, "Oh, like that. What is that?" The thing with this movie is, because we don't actually know what it's supposed to look like, that makes it all the more horrifying as we're watching it, and why it holds up even better. Because if a dog was to be possessed by an alien life form, how do we know that when its face and skin and everything started ripping off its body and it started shooting out things to eat the other dogs, essentially, that this isn't exactly what it would look like? We don't know. And it doesn't just look like rubber or claymation. I mean, the part at the end where he puts his hand in the guy's face and is dragging him away like that is so flawless. It's so flawless. I don't know how he pulled that off. It is so flawless.
Yeah, and those are the little things that you appreciate. And it's one of the reasons why I continuously go back to the thing. It's just that appreciation of the effects in it. Because while we can watch, I mean, tomorrow's May the 4th, right? Like, we can watch Star Wars over and over again. But, like, one of the biggest condemnments of that film is the 97 re-release of them with the CGI instead of the practical effects, right? And you look at it, it does seem out of place because CGI wasn't great for a very long time. Arguably, CGI still isn't great sometimes. Look at something like Avatar that still looks like trash. Right?
Even though most people would disagree with that, but I don't think it looked good.
Yeah. But we have the thing. And like, the thing that practical effects does to a film is it makes it timeless. Because you don't have to worry about things looking out, because they have to make it realistic in the real world, because that's what they're doing. And like, it has to look like everything else around it. It has to fit in. And that's why when we get things like the defibrillator scene,
God,
right?
The defibrillator scene is so amazing.
So good. So good. Like with the fake arms on Copper and everything and like pulling them off. It's so good. Or when you have like Palmer turning into the thing between everyone or beside everyone. Like, those are the moments that you really think about in this movie. You really remember in this movie. And those are 40-year-old effects.
Yeah. And they hold up so well. I mean, the defibrillator scene is incredible, but I always think that the best scene of this movie is the blood jump scare. That's the only jump scare in the movie. I mean, I guess the other jump scare in the movie is when the guy comes around the corner, whatever his name is, the doc. When he comes around the corner, that's a jump scare. Like the blood part is so great, because then you have Keith David and I can never remember, Gary sitting there on the couch next to the guy, just like, get me out of here. Like, what? And it turns into this guy picking up the other guy and eating him and then spitting him out, and they have to burn the other guy alive. Like, all of that stuff is terrifying, and the tension just keeps building with every moment, because it's how are they going to get out of this and what's going to happen to them and all that, and these guys are tied up and blah blah blah. There is so much going on in that scene, but there are other scenes that live up to. I mean, the part where he puts his hands and he gets them bit off, then the head goes crawling away. I mean, that part is terrifying. It's creepy as all hell. But it's not just the creature feature stuff that makes this movie eerie. It's also the isolationism, and it's the little moments, like the where did this person go? What's wrong with him? I always think the first guy, I can never remember their names. There's so many damn characters. But the first guy, the part where they have to burn him outside in the snow. And it's like when they're like, okay, and he's got like the hands that are like not fully formed yet because the creature's still working on taking him over. Jennings, I think his name is. Like, that part's really creepy. And you know that they are in the middle of nowhere. And to start this movie with a dog being shot at relentlessly from a helicopter, and then the dog gets back to them and they kill the Norwegians who are shoot a guy, because they're just shooting so ridiculously because they don't care. That's how important this is. And then they go over to the Norwegian's place and you see what happened there and you realize something bad happened. But also, it kind of looks like humans did it. And then you see the huge cutout that they had with the UFO and all that. And that's all practical. And it's just, Ridley Scott does Alien 3 years earlier and a lot of nod to that as to going on with that. But all of that's happening. So now the tone has been set without anything terrifying happening. But every time we see the dog, Morricone's score is horrifying. Yes. You know that something horrible is about to happen with that dog. And like Corwin Green says here, while perhaps not the scariest, the monstrous blob scene with the dog towards the beginning is such a tone setter. That's the first time anything bad happens and we say, oh my God. And right before that, one of the most important shots of the movie is the dog walking into the one room with the shadow of the guy, right? Because he doesn't kill anybody.
Which one, though? Which guy is it?
Do you know?
I do.
Who is it?
It's very distinctly Norris.
And Norris is which one?
He is the one who gets defibrillated.
Yeah, okay, good. It's very distinctly Norris, like you say. So that's one of the most important shots of the movie because the dog walks in there and that's when it officially starts. Now somebody in there is infected.
And I think it's so important with Norris being this first one here because there's a scene later after the contaminated blood, after the blood's all destroyed, where everyone's like the tensions are rising. Gary, Windows goes, grabs the axe. Gary has the gun on him and everything. Windows grabs the gun and Gary has the gun on him and everything. And they're like, okay, we need someone else to be the leader. And Gary asks Norris to be the leader and Norris says no. And then you have to start thinking, okay, how does the thing work? Is the thing assimilating or is it replicating? Is this Norris at all? Is this the thing thinking it's Norris? Does the thing know it's not it's not Norris and it is the thing and its entire intention is to spread and replicate? Because if it is it not taking the leadership because that would be too obvious? Is it trying to blend in better? And this is the level of thinking that goes into this movie, the level of thought that goes into why this movie leaves you so paranoid because you don't know who you can trust. Because in this moment, Norris rejecting that seems like, okay, well, this can't possibly be the thing then. But he is clearly the thing because we know he's been the thing for the entire movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's because it takes your attention off it, right? While meanwhile, you're thinking it's got to be whatever the name of the guy with the dogs is because he's trying to kill Kurt Russell and all this. But he was fine the whole time. He was never actually taken. So like, I think, Corwin Green says, did Norris have a heart attack as part of the assimilation or was that some sort of deliberate blending mechanism by the thing?
I have to believe it was a deliberate action by the thing because it was right as McCready comes back, right? It's right after McCready comes back after being let out and cut loose by Knowles. So it has to be deliberate because at that point it becomes obvious that the thing's in a lot of danger because McCready has a plan on what to do and has dynamite.
Yeah, and has dynamite. Yeah, exactly. And we also know by this point, because of what the doctor says, that, or at least what he discovers, is that this thing can take over the planet in 27,000 days or whatever it is.
Yes.
And it's like, okay, so we know that this can spread quickly. Yeah, this is going to move pretty quick. So we know that for all of them, they could all become infected just by the thing, even if the thing has to reveal itself in this moment. If it has, gotten 3 or 4 people, it doesn't matter anymore because you can't kill them all. And I mean, that it's very cool how all of the different mysteries of the thing and all that stuff are unveiled throughout the entire movie. And one thing that I really give John Carpenter credit for, and man, it just speaks to why this is an 80s movie and why this isn't a now movie. Because remember, again, 1979, we had a 9-person or 8-person movie called Alien, where there is no main character. We all now know Ripley as the main character, but that first movie, she's not the main character. There's no main character. And then for The Thing, there's 13, 14 people in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I wrote this in my Letterboxd review, but the biggest thing I noticed about this movie is normally if you have like 13 or 14 main characters, there's one scene that's going to take out like 5 or 6 of like what do they call them? The red coats or whatever they would call them in Game of Thrones, the red shirts. Oh, the red shirts are in Star Trek, and then they would call them whatever in Game of Thrones, where they would go out when they go beyond the wall. Yeah. There's like 4 extra characters that aren't Jon Snow and Bronn and all that. And it's like, oh, why are they there? That's stupid. There's no throwaways in this movie. We all know Kurt Russell is the main character, but everybody else in this movie wasn't that well known. And they still aren't that well known. I mean, really, Keith David's the only one.
Keith David's the only one? Yeah.
Yeah, he's really the only one. So, but to not shy away from that and to not force storylines, right? Because nowadays it would be, okay, who's sleeping with who? Who's friends with who? Who's doing this? I think even in The Thing from Another World, there's women in the movie. How I always talk about The Descent, one of the best parts about The Descent is that it's all women who go spelunking. Well, The Thing works because it's all men. There's no love story. There's no, I got to be heroic. It's survival. Survive, survive, survive. I will do whatever I have to keep myself alive, even if that means killing you. That's what works so well in The Thing. So I love that. And I love that there's 12, 13, 14 characters, however many it is, and that each one of them get their own send-off when they should get their send-off. There's no rushing of, oh, you don't even realize that person died. You realize every person in this movie dies when they die, but it never feels redundant. It never feels, every time somebody dies, you feel like you're learning something.
Mm-hmm. And I think the closest we come to someone dying and you maybe missing it is the Fuchs death.
Yes.
When he lights himself on fire with the flare after after being outside, like that is the one that you can miss in this movie. And it's just like, it's still such an iconic moment. Like, because it sets the tone. It sets the tone for the paranoia that's going on here. Because it's getting to that point where people are thinking, what if I am the thing?
Mm-hmm.
Or what happens to me? Because I've seen people being eaten by these things. Like, what is going to happen? It's just so well constructed to play with the human psyche.
Yeah. And this is why I'll never love something like The Last of Us or The Walking Dead or like any of this zombie stuff or anything like that, because The Thing did it so well.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I understand that like everything's going to be different. You can't always compare it to the best version of something, but it's so hard for me to feel a real intensity because it all feels so forced. Like I think about The Last of Us, like the episode where Bella Ramsey and the girl she's with in the orphanage or whatever, where they go to the mall. Mm-hmm. It is so forced for character development. It is so forced for character development. The Thing doesn't have anything forced for character development. The closest you could say to that is McCready putting on his cowboy hat, right? Like that is the closest thing to like forced for characters. So we know he's a cowboy. He's an all-American, whatever. We knew that anyway because he's Kurt freaking Russell. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
But like this movie just lets itself go. And the relationships change based on what's happening, which we don't always see in movies. A lot of times it'll be like, John, you and I are close. So now I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep you safe. Mm-hmm. This movie, as soon as they start to think somebody else is the evil person, screw them, tie them to the damn chair, and let's burn them alive. I don't care. That's what's awesome about this movie, because every one of them gets their moment, and their relationships and their thoughts, you can see why they're thinking the way that they're thinking. I hadn't seen this movie in a while, and this will be close to my top 100 the next time. It might creep in, and especially, I mean, I watched it in April. If I watch this in October, this might definitely be in my top 100. I mean, I always loved this movie. I just kind of forgot how much I love this movie.
Yeah, I think it's really important because, like, you're talking about like this distinction in character and stuff, and how there's no like big character defining moment in this where it's like, you know, breaks up the characters. It's because they set them up so well in that opening scene when the Norwegians are shooting the dog.
Yeah.
In that scene, you learn everything you need to know about every single character in this camp.
Yeah.
And it sets it up really well. Like, you get this idea that Childs is kind of like this hothead, like more militaristic type of guy down here. You also have this realization that like these are all scientists, right?
Yeah.
They're all scientists. These are people who are working at, you know, whatever you do in Antarctica. Then you have like the more ancillary people to that science crew, where you have like Knowles as the cook, you have Windows as the communication guy, you have McCready as the helicopter pilot, right? Like you have those people on the outskirts of it, but they're all this interconnected community that's so close because they're all they have there. And as soon as that paranoia starts, we see everyone just starts turning on each other. And part of the brilliance of this movie, John Carpenter lets characters disappear for long periods of time. And that includes our so-called main character, McCready.
I was just going to say, the last two people who live both disappear at some point in this movie.
Yes, and John Carpenter has gone on record saying one of them is the Thing.
Yeah, so one with the stone says, so what are the theories about what happened to McCready? Do you think McCready or Childs is the Thing?
I think Childs is the Thing.
I think Childs is the Thing as well.
There's a lot of theories around it. There's a big theory. One of the main theories about it, because John Carpenter has gone on record saying one of them is the Thing, but will never tell us which one. And the big internet theories about it is that when McCready passes the alcohol over to Childs at the end, he has to actually replaced it with kerosene at that point to see if he is the Thing or not. But the bigger thing is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which one of them is the Thing. It doesn't matter if either of them are the Thing. They're both dead.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what is so cool about this movie too. You think about a lot of these movies that try to do, The Descent is one, but they put themselves in that position as like an adventure. Underwater, that godforsaken movie that came out, Kristen Stewart, which is a steaming pile of shit. They're underwater. Like, that's the cool thing. They're in Antarctica as scientists. Like, this is something that, there's people in Antarctica right now who are scientists, and that's what they're doing. And winter's coming, so they stay in their place, and they're well stocked for it, and they're ready for it, and they know that they're isolated. But it also creates, like you were saying, like that community where they're so close. It's -20, -40, going to get colder outside.
Yeah.
And as that goes on and on and on and on, they can't escape from the little room that they're in. And those guys outside, the one knock on this, they'd have frostbite by then. They'd already be frostbitten. But Corbin Green says the other popular theory is that Childs drinks it seemingly without hesitation, like he wasn't concerned about becoming a Thing.
That's the other thing, because there's the mention earlier on that Fuchs says about how if it only takes one cell from this thing, we should all be preparing our own food.
Yeah. Yeah. And at that point, McCready knows he's just going to go walk into the fire anyway, right? Like
they both resign themselves to being dead at that point.
Yeah. And at that point, I think even the Thing itself knows, okay, I can go freeze myself, but nobody's going to buy that a frozen Childs is,
Yeah,
it's a great movie. It holds up so incredibly well, and it's more exciting than Alien, right? Like, I love Alien, and Alien's in my top 100. And I think I still like Alien more, but the Thing just, it's got those moments of like, there's a couple defining moments in science fiction history, right? Science fiction horror history.
Yeah.
The face hugger is one. The blood test is one. And the defibrillator scene is another. Like, those are three of the most iconic. So the Thing has two of them. And the Thing itself is more fun for longer. It's more exciting from beginning to end, which is what one of Alien's big strengths is, that it is a very normal, we're just going on a rescue mission. The Thing is totally different than that. And the tension has to be there from the start because they're not going anywhere. They're staying.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, and why I will always rank The Thing as the best horror movie, I never feel more terror than that right after I watched The Thing. You texted me about, jokingly about like your dog looking at you the way the dog looks at you.
Yeah.
Like, in this, and it's like my cat was doing the exact same thing, and it's like, it's nothing to worry about, but you're still second guessing it because it's just so visceral what you just witnessed, and like you have to think about it. Like, I think the first time I saw The Thing, I didn't trust people for like 3 days.
Oh yeah. No, it's definitely one of those movies that makes you question, why is my dog staring at the wall? Like, what's going on? It's a pure paranoia movie. It's a hard thing to capture. and we don't see it captured very well very often. We really don't. Yeah, I'm a huge fan. What else you got about it? Because we're at time.
I just watch it. Watch it again. I'm probably going to watch it again pretty soon, too, because it's just so good.
Yeah, it's really, really fun. But we're going on to our top 3 next week, and it's going to be Vertigo from 1958 and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind from 2004. So we're in the top 3. 3 episodes remaining. It will be next Wednesday.
Yeah,
I forgot to tell you that, but it will be next Wednesday. So the only, just the last one will not be on the Wednesday, the 24th. We're gonna have to figure out what time we're gonna do that, what day, and all that fun stuff. But other than that, yeah. So next week, Vertigo from 1958, Eternal Sunshine from 2004, and after that, just There Will Be Blood and American Beauty and Stalker and the Deer Hunter. We are almost done. So hope you all enjoyed this one. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.